our session together, I'd like to invite Marla Becker to chant some Jonah for us. And if we want to follow along with you, Marla, do you want to find a page number? Will you let us know? Yeah, Marla's going to do it.
Yes, bottom of 345. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbiim tovim v'ratza v'divrechem hane'emarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai Habocher b'Torah uv Moshe avdo uv Yisrael amo uvin b'yei ha'emet v'tzedek Vayeman Adonai gadol livloa et Yonah vayehi Yonah bimei hadag shlosha yamim ushlosha lelot vayitpalel Yonah el Adonai Elohav mimei hadagah Vayomer karati mitzara li el Adonai vayaneni mi beten sheol shivati shamatakoli Vatashlicheni metzula bilvav yamim vanahar yesoveveni kol mishparecha vegalecha alai avaru vahani amarti nigarshti Mineged einecha, ach, osif lehabit el heichal kodshecha. Afafuni mayim ad nefesh techom yesoveveni suf chavush leroshi. Lekitzvei harim yaradeti haaretz berichecha vadi leolam vatal mishachat chayai Adonai Elohai bechitatei falai nafshi Et Adonai zacharti vatavo elecha tefilati el heichal kodshecha mishamrim chavle shav chastam ya'azovu fa'ani Bekol todah es bechalach asher nadarti ashalema Yeshuata latonai Vayomer Adonai latah et Yonah el hayabasha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol haolamim tzadik bechol hatorot ha'el haneman ha'omer ve'oseh hamedaber umkayem shekol tivarav emet v'tzedek al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al hanvi'im ve'al yom ha'kippurim hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu limchila v'lislicha ulchapara lechavod ultifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umvarchim otach yitbarach shimcha befi kol chai tamid leolam va'ed udvarcha emet v'kayam la'ad Baruch atah Adonai melech mohel v'soleach la'avanotenu v'la'avanot amo beit Yisrael uma'avir ashmotenu bechol shana v'shana melech al kol ha'aretz mekadesh Yisrael ve'yom ha'kippurim.
So Marla is here not just as one of our Bar Mitzvah tutors and a member of our congregation that has the talent of chanting Haftorah, but also as a member of Rofei Tzedek. And the topic of our study this afternoon is Jonah and its connection to climate justice and teshuvah. First, what I wanted to do is actually open our Machzor to a vidui that is here that can be found on page 307, called the Vidui for the 21st Century. So as we confess the sins that we all commit together, our Machzor acknowledges that we are all responsible for our climate crisis. And it reads, we confess our sins against the earth. We commit ourselves to saving it. And we could read together. We have assaulted our planet in countless ways. We have blamed others for the spiraling, deepening crisis. We have consumed thoughtlessly and irresponsibly. We have driven myriad species to the point of extinction. We have exhausted irreplaceable resources. We have failed to transcend borders and act unselfishly. We have given in to our many appetites and our gluttony. We have harmed beyond repair the habitats of living beings. We have ignored the signs of change in our climate and our seasons. We have jeopardized the well-being of future generations. We have known the problem but left problem solving to others. We have lost sight of our role as God's partners in creation. We have mocked cynically those who love creatures great and small. We have neglected the environment, most of all in places of poverty. We have overpopulated our cities and overfished our oceans. We have polluted seashore and sky, fertile soil and freshwater springs. We have questioned and doubted solid evidence of danger. We have ravaged the old growth forest ecosystems created over centuries. We have spewed poison into the bloodstream of our land, its rivers, lakes, and estuaries. We have transformed dazzling beauty into industrial ugliness. Have used shared resources for personal gain and corporate profit. We have violated the commandment, do not destroy. We have wasted precious treasures, our God-given gifts. We have exploited the weakest and most vulnerable in our midst, and yet we yearn to be better guardians of this earth and the fullness thereof. Let us be zealous now to care for this unique corner of the cosmos, this planet, our sacred home. So as Jonah is about ignoring our responsibilities, but then later facing them, we are going to look at Jonah today through this lens of how we can more urgently address the climate crisis. So we are going to do this in small groups where we get to know each other and get to share some ideas and learn together. I'm going to ask if Rabbi Rebecca can help pass out our source sheets. And there are, I believe, 2 other small group leaders that are going to facilitate, 2 or 4. Oh, amazing. Okay. So I'm going to start by reading a first section of Jonah, and then I'm going to invite us to get into, let's do 4 small groups of about 8 people. Does that feel? Thank you. See, that makes my day. All right. Okay, we'll figure it out. But first, we're going to look at the first chapter of Jonah. And here, you can pass these around. Thanks, Elaine. The word of God came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me. Jonah, however, started to flee to Tarshish from God's service. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went aboard to sail with the others to Tarshish, away from God's service. But God cast a mighty wind upon the sea, and such a great tempest came upon the sea that the ship was in danger of breaking up. So we'll break out into our first study group, answer some questions, then get together for our second part of Jonah before we hear a concluding message from Rabbi Rebecca. Let's just take one more minute to finish our prompt 1, and then we'll regather just for a moment. All right. So I want everyone just to pause their conversations just for a moment. You can stay in your spots, but we'll kind of regather as a large group just to hear some of the ideas that were shared. So I want to ask if the group leaders, I'll go around with the mic, can summarize something compelling that came up from your group about the call that you heard and also the calls or the reasons why you might have resisted. So I'm going to ask, I'll start with Rabbi Rebecca.
Thank you. So our group had a wonderful discussion. We talked both about climate and how even this past week when many of us put masks back on when the AQI went up, it was impossible to ignore what's happening to our planet, but that a lot of the time it can feel distant, and it's in moments like this when we're monitoring the AQI that it's really in our faces quite literally, and we can't avoid it. We also talked about the crisis of folks who are challenged to find safe shelter and housing, and that sometimes it's easier for us to, like Jonah, walk the other way because we are not sure or we're scared or we're nervous. And that it made us feel, I don't know if I can say a little more understanding of Jonah, but to recognize that these are fraught and complicated situations when we are small people in a big world.
Thanks for being so honest about those challenges. Nancy, will you summarize?
Well, we probably didn't get quite as in-depth, but we talked about what people's individual choices are and what we're doing, using Ridwell or putting in a new heat pump, and then got back a little bit of a discussion on Israel and what's going on with desalinization there, and then got a little bit into what about walking away or not, but we didn't get terribly far to that far.
Well, thanks. Well, we will have more time to discuss, and I think what that represented is that even within this large umbrella of a climate crisis, one reason we might resist the call is because there are so many issues that we could tackle at once. Just focusing on water, just focusing on air quality, just focusing on food waste or single-use plastics. There are just so many ways that you could get your hands dirty, literally, that overwhelmingness of the job often makes us resist.
Thank you. Our group discussed quite a few things. We spent a lot of time talking about the call itself and how do you get motivated to take action without being overwhelmed, because the things that we can do as individuals seem so small. We talked about recycling and so forth, and how does that weigh against the whole larger picture? And we did settle on the need for leadership, that was important, and looked at Jonah's message of, fear, you're going to be destroyed, the world is burning, we have to do something, versus maybe taking a more positive message as a way of trying to reach people.
Beautiful. I love that you spoke about, where is that call coming from? If it's not coming from God, but it's coming from a politician, maybe we're not as trustworthy, trusting of the voice that is calling us. Beautiful. Nancy.
we also talked about how overwhelming this whole issue is, and just it seems very difficult to get one's foot in when one's feeling so overwhelmed. But there are. That said, we are taking small steps, and how important it is to be making and taking those small steps, because without taking those small steps, it's much harder to take big steps, and we need to start small, and without starting small, we're never going to get any place. So.
Well, thanks, and that's going to be that discussion's going to be continued once we read the text of part 2, because it's so right. We have to not feel as if we're one single person. And again, in reflecting why Jonah might have run away, it was not a job for just one person to do.
So I messed up a little as a group leader, and we spent a lot of time on the intro of what resonated with you in introductions, and I didn't even see that second question. So I got us a little late to the discussion of the book of Jonah, but I would say what we ended up focusing on are some points that were brought up of feeling a sense of frustration and sometimes of hopelessness when we think of the small individual acts that we've been taking, whether it's recycling or composting, and then learning more in recent years of that maybe it's not having the impact that we thought it was, or what we thought we were recycling is not always being recycled, and that can lead to this sense of like, well, what's the point then? What can I even do? So looking at, though, that by still continuing to do those individual actions, it's a part of a much larger solution. And, through Road Faith Tzedek, we work with the Religious Action Center, Reform Judaism, working on more systems change, but that, there's the systemic policy solutions that can seem bigger than us, but maybe collectively that we can work together on, but that it's also important to have that piece of the individual actions and the impact that has on our younger people, our children, and seeing as we take those actions of how important this all is.
Well, thanks for that engaging first round of discussion. We're going to turn to our second part of Jonah, which are 2 texts. And so I'll read them out loud. It speaks to that collective responsibility that especially it sounded like Nancy's group harped on. In their fright, the sailors cried out, each to his own god, and they flung the ship's cargo overboard to make it lighter for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the vessel, where he lay down and fell asleep. They said to him, "Tell us, you who have brought this misfortune upon us, what is your business? Where have you come from? What is your country, and of what people are you?" "I am a Hebrew," he replied. "I worship the Eternal, the God of heaven, who made both sea and land." The men were greatly terrified, and they asked him, "What have you done?" And when the men learned that he was fleeing from God's service, for he told them, they said to him, "What must we do to make the sea calm around us?" For the sea was growing more and more stormy. He answered, "Heave me overboard, and the sea will calm down for you. For I know that this terrible storm came upon you on my account." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to regain the shore, but they could not, for the sea was growing more and more stormy about them. Then they cried out to God, "Oh, please, Eternal One, do not let us perish on account of this man's life. Do not hold us guilty of killing an innocent person, for you, O Eternal One, and by your will have brought this about." And they heaved Jonah overboard, and the sea stopped raging. The men feared God greatly and offered a sacrifice to God, and they made vows. So thinking of that imagery of the entire crew of the ship being impacted by just one Jonah's action, I included a short midrash from the book of Leviticus on the back page. In the Torah we learn, when one person sins, God will be wrathful with the whole community. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught a parable. People were on a ship. One of them took a drill and started drilling underneath them. The other said, "What are you sitting and doing?" What do you care? Is this not underneath my area that I'm drilling? They said, but the water will rise and flood us all on this ship. So for about the next 15 minutes, I invite you to continue those discussions from the questions from prompt 2, this time with a focus more on the collective responsibility that we have towards solving a crisis together. Okay. I apologize, the clock in this room is wrong. We have 10 minutes together. just unfortunately our time is tight. Let's take one more minute to kind of say those final thoughts in our group, and then we'll whip around and ask the group leaders again just to give us just a one-sentence representation of your conversation. All right. I love that. On that note, I'm going to ask, I just heard a profound closing statement. I can only change myself. I'm going to ask Rebecca to represent just the discussion briefly to the rest of the group.
Sure, yes. So we did keep coming back to the fact that ultimately it's easier to change only our own behavior and not the broad societal changes, but we talked about other types of culture shifts we've seen, from smoking being accepted, same-sex marriage, things that even 20, 30 years ago we never would have imagined would be perceived so differently across the culture. And so we were looking at how do we, there's a start of a culture shift for that around climate, and how do we push that forward?
Thanks. I love that you offered us a nechemtas, a hopeful, reflection on some other ways that we have changed huge issues in a short amount of time.
Rebecca, what did you do over there? I'm impressed with how hopeful your group sounds. I don't think our group is feeling quite that hopeful, but the one of the things that came up was that when somebody invites you to do something that makes something that you might not do otherwise seem fun, that is a way to help promote doing things that you might not be doing otherwise. There were a couple of other points. I was just struck with how hopeful you folks were against the tide that our group. Go ahead.
No, I think that there's a short plug in there that if people are getting together and sharing a joyful experience doing the work, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a communal effort.
It's a little challenging to summarize what we were saying. We spent a little time just discussing, not really seeing kind of some disconnect between Jonah and climate, and so trying to find the parallels between the text and climate. But then in terms of communal response and what we can do as a community, we spoke a little bit about what, as a PTBE community, we've done with solar panels, and then we spoke about getting electric cars, but also the need to make sure that that's accessible to everyone, and in lower income areas and lower income communities, and not just for those who can afford it to make these decisions that we can make this change. So to have it be more of a true community collective response to make it more accessible.
That's really helpful to note, and we don't want to deny our privilege here at PTBE to be able to make so many of the efforts we need to make. Rabbi Rebecca, I'm going to come to your group last because you have the closing word for us. So I'm going to ask Nancy.
Our group, we discussed it, and one of the things was the political climate that we have a part. I know we're not supposed to get partisan, but that we have a party that doesn't believe in climate change, that it's a problem, and the impact of oil companies. Also, Susan brought up the Jewish Earth Alliance that does a lot of writing letters, especially on the national level, on climate issues. And then also the extra parable that you brought in was discussed too, because of people not thinking that what they do affects other people, is something that it seems very, I mean, we all notice that in our lives, that people don't think that it matters what they do or that they'd hurt other people with what they're doing.
Thank you. I'm hearing notes of Rabbi Rebecca's sermon on obligation from last night. All right.
Our group also talked about communal responsibility, like Marla's group, and we spent quite a bit of time exploring this metaphor of the ship and what does it mean to rise together or fall together in different ways. And we talked about some of the changes we've seen in our lifetime, some that seem for the better, places where pollution has improved due to communal efforts and places where it has gotten worse. And we've thought about what does that mean, that sometimes it can feel like something's improved because right where we are it looks a little better, but we know somewhere else it's gotten worse. And Steve also brought up shush and the fact that, you know, you're not, if I can quote you, Steve is not in a place where he currently needs a sandwich on a Sunday, but he is so glad that he can go and make a sandwich and to know that if he needed one, there is a place for that. So it is a cyclical group responsibility that we really focused on. So we know our time is short, and we want to thank you for learning with Rabbi Lisa and with our Road Faith Tzedek leaders this afternoon. We do need to move fairly quickly to make sure that this space can be turned over, and we encourage you to stay for a contemplative service with Saul right at 3. But before that, we want to share, if you are feeling hopeful or hopeless or inspired or challenged or all of the other things, to come get involved and to put your voice and your presence in a group where people together can be stronger than we are as individuals. So Road Faith Tzedek is launching our new endeavor, Road Faith Reads, which is a 2-part book club focusing on a book, The Future We Choose, by one of the top UN climate negotiators, which really tries to take a hopeful, action-oriented approach towards confronting the climate crisis, rather than let us feel terrified and doom and gloom and stick our heads in the sand because it's just too scary. She is calling us forward with hope and with action. So we'll invite you to join us. We have books and a sign-out sheet for our books. I think Nancy has the books. So, and they will also be in the foyer. So we invite you to come and join us for this 2-part series in October and November with Road Faith Tzedek. And we also want to say that Road Faith Tzedek and Bethel Women will be having a shared effort in the Sukkah in just a couple weeks on Tuesday, October 3rd. Thanks, Rebecca. So you can come and join Road Faith Tzedek and Bethel Women to also get involved in reproductive justice, another focus of our efforts as a community where we know that together we are stronger than we are as individuals. Thank you. And again, please come check out these books we have for Road Faith Reads. We're looking forward to learning with you, getting inspired with you, and taking action with you.